The story begins in a courtroom, setting the stage for an intense legal drama. The protagonist, Judge Carla Whitman, is introduced as a confident and dedicated judicial figure. She is a woman of principle, known for her commitment to justice and fairness. However, her journey takes a sharp turn when a confrontation with a police officer, Officer Melissa Conway, escalates into an unexpected challenge to her authority. The tension between the two characters begins with Officer Conway's display of blatant disrespect toward Judge Whitman. Conway, fueled by racial prejudice and a disregard for authority, insults the judge in front of the courtroom. This act of defiance sets the tone for the unfolding drama, as it is clear that there are deeper issues at play, involving not just individual animosities, but systemic racism that permeates both law enforcement and the judicial system. The audience is immediately thrust into a conflict that mirrors broader societal tensions, racial discrimination, power dynamics, and the struggle for justice. Judge Whitman, though strong in her convictions, faces an uphill battle, as she not only deals with Conway's insubordination, but also begins to realize that her own life and the safety of her family are now at risk. This is just the beginning of a dangerous and complex journey that will test her resolve and challenge her commitment to uphold the law, no matter the cost. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more updates and thrilling episodes. Your support helps us create more content that you love. The tension between Judge Carla Whitman and Officer Melissa Conway grows steadily, revealing layers of deep-rooted prejudice, pride, and professional egos. From the very first incident, it is evident that Officer Conway harbors a simmering resentment toward the judicial system, and Judge Whitman, as a representative of that system, becomes the target of her disdain. The conflict begins in a courtroom, where an otherwise routine hearing escalates into a spectacle of personal animosity. Judge Whitman is presiding over a case involving a minor traffic violation, a case that ordinarily wouldn't command much attention. However, Officer Conway, who is assigned to testify, takes the opportunity to publicly challenge the judge's authority. During cross-examination, Conway interrupts Whitman with an air of superiority and defiance. She mocks the court proceedings, questioning the validity of the judge's rulings, and openly defies the courtroom's decorum. It is clear to all present that this is not just a disagreement over legal matters, but rather a personal attack on Judge Whitman's professionalism and her position in the justice system. At first, Judge Whitman remains composed, maintaining her professionalism and attempting to defuse the situation. She tries to reason with Officer Conway, appealing to her sense of duty and respect for the law. But Conway is unyielding, treating the courtroom like a stage for her own personal vendetta against the very system she is sworn to serve. The tension builds as Conway continues to undermine the judge's authority, making sarcastic remarks and challenging her decisions at every turn. The audience can sense that this is more than just a simple disagreement over courtroom procedures. It's a clash of worldviews and values. As the confrontation escalates, it becomes clear that the friction between Judge Whitman and Officer Conway goes beyond this one moment in the courtroom. It is a reflection of the larger societal issues at play, issues of power, privilege, and systemic injustice. Officer Conway is not just challenging Whitman's legal rulings. She is questioning the very foundation of the legal system itself, which she perceives as unfair and biased against certain communities, particularly those from marginalized racial backgrounds. Conway's actions are not solely about defying the court. They are an embodiment of a growing frustration with what she believes to be a rigged and unequal system. For Judge Whitman, the situation is a harsh wake-up call. She has spent years working within the system, believing in its ability to deliver justice fairly and impartially. But Conway's defiance forces her to confront the reality that not everyone shares her belief in the sanctity of the law. It is the beginning of a realization that the judicial system, though structured and authoritative, may not be as unflinching in its fairness as she once thought. She finds herself grappling with the complexity of her role, not just as a judge, but as a member of the system itself. The conflict intensifies when the media gets involved, further complicating the already tense relationship. News outlets begin to cover the courtroom clash, framing it as a battle between two powerful figures, one representing the law and the other representing the people. The narrative quickly shifts from a legal disagreement to a sensationalized spectacle, with both Whitman and Conway becoming symbols for larger societal debates. The media's portrayal of the incident fuels the fire, portraying Judge Whitman as an out-of-touch authority figure and Officer Conway as a brave whistleblower standing up against systemic oppression. As the case progresses, Conway continues to undermine the judge, but this time, her actions take on a more dangerous edge. During a routine court session, she refuses to comply with a direct order from the judge, creating a tense standoff in the courtroom. Whitman orders her arrest for contempt of court, but Conway resists, physically pushing back against law enforcement officers who attempt to take her into custody. The altercation results in a brief but intense scuffle, and the entire courtroom is thrown into chaos. In the aftermath of the confrontation, Conway is briefly detained, but the damage is already done. The already fragile relationship between the judicial and law enforcement systems is now shattered, and the conflict between the two women has spiraled out of control. Judge Whitman, now facing public scrutiny and pressure from her peers, is forced to reevaluate her stance on the matter. She had always prided herself on upholding the law, but Conway's actions have forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about the system she serves. She begins to question whether true justice can ever be achieved within a system that, in her view, often fails to deliver fairness, particularly for marginalized communities. It is a sobering realization that, despite her best efforts, she may be powerless to address the systemic issues that Conway is so vehemently protesting against. For Officer Conway, the fallout from her actions is equally significant. While some members of the public view her as a hero, others see her as a rogue officer who is undermining the very structure that keeps society in order. Her career is put in jeopardy, and she faces disciplinary action from her department. However, she is unwavering in her belief that she is on the right side of history. She sees herself not as a criminal, but as someone who is challenging the status quo in the hopes of creating a more just world. Conway believes that the law should serve the people, not the other way around, and she is willing to sacrifice her career for the greater good. The conflict between Judge Whitman and Officer Conway, once confined to a single courtroom, has now become a symbol of the larger battle between the judicial system and those who feel disenfranchised by it. It has ignited a firestorm of debate, with people on both sides of the issue passionately defending their views. For Whitman, it is an existential crisis, a test of her own beliefs and her place within the legal system. For Conway, it is a call to action, an opportunity to expose the flaws in the system that she believes perpetuate inequality and injustice. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear that the conflict between the judge and the police officer is just the beginning of a much larger struggle. Their personal battle will evolve into a larger societal movement, one that questions the very foundations of the justice system and seeks to address the deep-seated issues of racial bias, inequality, and power that continue to plague society. For both women, the stakes are higher than ever before, and the outcome of their confrontation will have far-reaching implications for the future of justice. As the conflict between Judge Whitman and Officer Conway reaches its peak, it becomes evident that the situation is no longer a matter of personal disagreements, but a public spectacle with wider implications. The courtroom clash between the two women, which initially seemed like an isolated incident, has now captured the attention of the media and stirred public debate. The growing tension threatens not only the professional careers of both women, but also the very integrity of the justice system itself. Recognizing the gravity of the situation, the police director, Chief Olivia Matthews, steps in to intervene. Chief Matthews is a seasoned law enforcement officer with years of experience managing high-stakes situations. She is no stranger to conflict, having dealt with internal issues within the police force on numerous occasions. However, this is different. The dispute between a respected judge and one of her officers is a crisis that demands immediate attention. Matthews is acutely aware that if left unchecked, the situation could spiral out of control, damaging both the public perception of the police force and the delicate relationship between law enforcement and the judicial system. The intervention begins when Matthews calls a meeting with Officer Conway. In the face of public scrutiny and departmental pressure, Conway is feeling the weight of her actions. She is aware that she has become a controversial figure, viewed by some as a hero and by others as a rogue officer. Matthews, however, is not concerned with the public narrative. Her primary goal is to address the internal conflict that has now put the police force in a precarious position. Matthews meets with Conway privately, hoping to understand the officer's motivations and provide guidance. The conversation is tense, as both women understand the gravity of the situation. Conway is defiant, reiterating her belief that the justice system is flawed and that she was right to challenge Judge Whitman. She argues that the actions she took were in defense of justice and fairness, particularly for marginalized communities that she believes have long been mistreated by the system. Conway's words are impassioned, and she speaks with a conviction that borders on righteousness. Chief Matthews listens carefully, her expression stern but not unkind. She understands the frustrations that have led Conway to this point, but also knows that the line between defiance and insubordination is dangerously thin. Matthews calmly explains the delicate nature of Conway's position. She reminds Conway that, while her intentions may be noble, the manner in which she chose to challenge the system has caused irreparable damage to both her career and the reputation of the police force. In a profession that demands discipline and respect for authority, Conway's actions, especially her public confrontation with a judge, have crossed a line. Despite Matthews' calm demeanor, Conway is unwilling to back down. She insists that the police force itself is part of the same broken system that has caused so much harm to the communities they serve. The conversation becomes more heated, with Conway challenging Matthews' allegiance to the system she is sworn to uphold. Matthews, however, remains resolute. She makes it clear that her duty is not to take sides, but to ensure that the police force operates within the bounds of the law. In her role as police director, Matthews must navigate the complexities of the situation, balancing the need for accountability within her department with the broader societal issues that have led to Conway's rebellion. The meeting concludes with no resolution, but Matthews makes it clear that Conway must address the consequences of her actions. The officer is ordered to take a temporary leave of absence to reflect on her conduct and to undergo counseling to address the underlying issues that led to her outburst. While Conway is frustrated by the decision, Matthews assures her that the time away is meant for reflection, not punishment. The hope is that, through this period of introspection, Conway will come to understand the broader ramifications of her actions and recognize the importance of working within the system, rather than against it. While Conway's leave of absence is one piece of the puzzle, Matthews knows that the larger issue, bridging the divide between law enforcement and the judicial system, remains unresolved. The police director recognizes that the tensions exposed by this conflict cannot be ignored. She decides to meet with Judge Whitman in an attempt to mediate the growing animosity between the two women and to address the underlying issues within the system itself. Matthews reaches out to Judge Whitman, requesting a private meeting to discuss the situation. The invitation is met with some hesitation, as Whitman is still grappling with the impact of the public clash with Officer Conway. However, she recognizes that Matthews' involvement may provide an opportunity for reconciliation and understanding. Whitman agrees to the meeting, and the two women sit down, each with their own perspective on the conflict. Matthews opens the conversation by acknowledging the difficult position Judge Whitman finds herself in. She expresses her respect for Whitman's role in the judicial system, but also points out that the situation with Officer Conway is a symptom of deeper issues within the system. Matthews suggests that both the police force and the judiciary must work together to address the flaws within the system, and that the current divide between law enforcement and the courts is harming the public's trust in both institutions. Judge Whitman listens intently, her expression thoughtful. She admits that she, too, has been struggling with the realization that the system she has dedicated her life to may not always deliver the justice it promises. The conversation turns to the broader issues of inequality, bias, and racial injustice that Conway had alluded to in their previous confrontations. Whitman and Matthews both agree that these issues must be addressed, but the question remains, how? As the conversation progresses, it becomes clear that the path to resolution will not be simple. The conflict between Judge Whitman and Officer Conway is not something that can be resolved through one-on-one conversations or internal disciplinary measures alone. It is a reflection of the larger societal struggles that have been simmering beneath the surface for years. Matthews, Whitman, and Conway are all part of a system that, despite its flaws, still holds immense power over the lives of the people it serves. Chief Matthews, ever pragmatic, suggests that the only way forward is for both the police force and the judiciary to engage in an open, honest dialogue about the issues at hand. The goal, she says, is not to find immediate solutions, but to create a space where both sides can listen to each other and work toward mutual understanding. The idea of a joint task force, comprising police officers, judges, and community leaders, is proposed as a potential first step in bridging the divide. This task force would be dedicated to addressing the systemic issues of racial bias, inequality, and injustice that have plagued both institutions. Judge Whitman, though skeptical, agrees that such a task force could be a valuable step in the right direction. Officer Conway, despite her reservations, is willing to participate, understanding that her actions have opened the door to a larger conversation about the flaws within the system. As the conflict between Judge Whitman and Officer Conway escalates, the fallout begins to extend beyond the courtroom and police precinct, with both women becoming increasingly public figures due to the media coverage surrounding their dispute. The threats they face intensify. What began as professional tension soon spirals into something far more dangerous, as both Judge Whitman and Officer Conway are targeted by individuals with a vested interest in seeing them silenced. For Judge Whitman, the threats are both direct and insidious. Her position as a judge in a high-profile case has made her a lightning rod for criticism from various factions. The more outspoken her critics become, the more personal the threats against her and her family grow. It starts with anonymous phone calls, the voice on the other end a low growl warning her to back off, to stop questioning the system. As the threats escalate, Whitman's home address is made public, and her family becomes the target of malicious individuals who feel emboldened by the public nature of the conflict. For Officer Conway, the situation is similarly grim. As an officer who defied both the judicial system and the higher-ups in her department, she has earned the ire of certain criminal groups who view her as a threat to their illicit operations. In retaliation, they begin to make threats against her and her loved ones. Initially, the threats are subtle, small, anonymous letters left on her doorstep, or messages slipped under the windshield of her car. But soon, the nature of the threats grows more violent. One evening, she receives a threatening phone call that is far more graphic than anything she has experienced before, warning her that if she does not drop her defiance against the system, there will be consequences for her family. The escalation of these threats puts both women on high alert, forcing them to take immediate action to protect themselves and their families. For Judge Whitman, the fear of harm coming to her family is palpable. She knows that her role in the public eye has made her a target for those with a vendetta, and she fears that the longer the situation drags on, the more dangerous it becomes for her loved ones. It's not just her own safety that concerns her. She worries for the safety of her children, her aging parents, and her spouse. With each passing day, the tension in her home grows, and she can no longer pretend that the threats are mere empty words. To safeguard her family, Judge Whitman takes several precautionary steps. She hires a private security detail, one that is experienced in handling high-risk threats. The team is discreet but vigilant, following her wherever she goes and ensuring her home is secure. Whitman also reaches out to her colleagues within the judicial system to alert them of the escalating threats, seeking their advice on how to navigate this precarious situation. The court system, aware of the public nature of the threats, offers additional support in the form of heightened security measures at her workplace. However, Whitman's fears extend beyond the courtroom. The thought of her children being followed to school or her spouse being targeted in the streets gnaws at her constantly. Similarly, Officer Conway's concern for her family's safety becomes all-consuming. She has always been fiercely protective of her loved ones, but now, with the constant threat of retaliation hanging over her, her anxiety reaches new heights. Her family, especially her younger siblings, are caught in the crossfire of a dispute that, to them, seems incomprehensible. Conway, who is used to dealing with dangerous criminals on the job, now finds herself in the unnerving position of needing to protect her family from threats that feel deeply personal. The weight of knowing that those she loves are now targets because of her actions in the line of duty adds an immense layer of stress to an already difficult situation. In response, Conway takes drastic measures to keep her family safe. She moves her parents and younger siblings to a new, undisclosed location, far away from their usual home and the threat of violent reprisal. She also works with her department's special task force to ensure that they have a clear plan in place to respond to any potential threats. While the department offers some degree of protection, Conway knows that the risks are real and immediate. As a former law enforcement officer, she is all too aware of how quickly a situation can escalate into violence. Despite these precautions, the stress of the situation begins to take a toll on both women's mental and emotional well-being. The constant anxiety, the heightened security measures, and the fear for their loved one's safety begin to erode their focus and resolve. Whitman struggles to maintain her composure, finding it increasingly difficult to balance her professional responsibilities with the need to protect her family. Her colleagues in the judiciary, though supportive, cannot understand the magnitude of what she is going through. The isolation she feels deepens as she begins to withdraw from the public eye, avoiding media appearances and cutting herself off from anyone who might be able to provide emotional support. Conway, too, begins to crack under the pressure. Despite her tough exterior and her reputation as a no-nonsense officer, she finds herself unable to sleep at night, consumed by fear for her family's safety. The threats have become so frequent and alarming that she is no longer able to distinguish between what is real and what is paranoia. She becomes hypervigilant, double-checking every lock, peering into every darkened alley, and constantly scanning her surroundings for potential threats. Her colleagues, noticing the change in her behavior, offer their support, but Conway remains emotionally distant, unwilling to open up to anyone about the overwhelming sense of dread that has taken over her life. For both women, the weight of the threats they face becomes a constant companion, following them wherever they go. The strain on their mental health and the toll on their personal lives is undeniable. Their ability to focus on their respective duties, Whitman as a judge and Conway as a police officer, becomes increasingly compromised as they are forced to prioritize their family's safety above all else. Despite the overwhelming pressure, both women refuse to back down. They remain determined to see the conflict through, even as it continues to put them in harm's way. The threats may have rattled them, but they refuse to let fear dictate their actions. Their resolve hardens as they face the terrifying reality that their family's safety hangs in the balance. In the end, their commitment to their duties, and to those they love, proves to be the driving force that propels them forward in the midst of an increasingly dangerous situation. As the weeks pass, the tension between Judge Whitman and Officer Conway reaches a boiling point. The conflict that began as a series of disagreements and public confrontations has now spiraled into an all-out battle, with each woman drawing lines in the sand. The stakes have risen dramatically, and the situation is no longer just about their professional roles. Both women are now involved in a dangerous game of cat and mouse, with increasingly severe consequences for their actions. The first signs of the situation truly escalating appear when Judge Whitman's office is broken into. It happens late one night, the intrusion going undetected for hours. Nothing is stolen, but the message is clear. Someone wants to send a warning. The judge's personal files, her casework, and sensitive information are all left untouched. However, her office is meticulously ransacked, and an unsettling symbol is left behind. A symbol that resonates with the criminal organizations she is entangled with due to her judicial decisions. The breach feels personal. The intimidation tactic is designed to make Whitman aware that she is being watched, that she is no longer safe even in her own place of work. It sends a shockwave through her life, and she immediately contacts the authorities, demanding that action be taken. The police response is swift, and while they promise to investigate, the reality is that the department's resources are stretched thin. The local police are already overwhelmed by the wave of threats they are dealing with on all fronts. Nonetheless, the police work closely with Whitman's security team, installing additional surveillance equipment around her home and office. They also advise her to take extra precautions and stay vigilant, warning her that the escalation of threats could indicate something far more dangerous. Meanwhile, Officer Conway's own life takes a dark turn. After weeks of receiving increasingly violent threats, she finds herself in the midst of a terrifying confrontation. One evening, as she leaves her shift, she notices a black van parked near her car. At first, she dismisses it, assuming it's just another parked vehicle. But as she approaches her car, the van's engine roars to life, and it speeds off, nearly running her down in the process. The close call sends Conway into a state of heightened alertness. The attack is clear. It is no longer just about threats. The danger has become physical. Conway immediately contacts her department and insists on a more aggressive response to the growing threats. In response, the police department steps in with a more significant presence, offering Conway personal protection. A dedicated detail of officers is assigned to accompany her at all times. They begin to monitor her movements closely, ensuring that she is never alone and that her safety is guaranteed. Despite the added security, Conway's nerves are rattled, and she becomes acutely aware of the dangers that now surround her at every turn. She can no longer trust her surroundings and remains constantly on edge, aware that the threat could strike at any moment. Her dedication to the job remains unwavering, but the fear of personal harm lingers, clouding her every action. Meanwhile, Judge Whitman faces even greater dangers as the anonymous threats against her continue to escalate. Following the break-in at her office, a series of threatening phone calls arrives. The voice on the other end is chilling, its words cutting through her nerves. Stop digging, stop asking questions, or your family will suffer. The calls are a direct attack on her personal life, and they reinforce the idea that whoever is behind this has access to her most intimate details. Her children's school schedules, her spouse's work hours, everything has been compromised. The idea that her family is now directly in the crosshairs of this malicious campaign sends Whitman into a tailspin. She is no longer just a judge facing threats in her professional capacity. She is now a mother, a wife, and a daughter, all under the constant shadow of danger. Desperate to take control of the situation, Whitman seeks advice from a crisis management team. They advise her to go into hiding temporarily, urging her to consider a complete relocation for the sake of her family's safety. But Whitman is unwilling to give up her role as a judge, and she refuses to let fear dictate her decisions. Instead, she insists on increasing her security measures, asking her security team to be on high alert at all times. She also reaches out to law enforcement for assistance, requesting that they bring in federal resources to investigate the threats further. But despite the increased security measures, Whitman knows deep down that the real danger lies in the fact that these threats are personal. Her enemies know where to hit her the hardest. And it's not just her career that is at stake, it's her loved ones. As tensions reach a breaking point, both Whitman and Conway find themselves forced to make difficult decisions. Conway, already overwhelmed by the mounting threats and the constant police protection, decides to step back from her role as an officer temporarily. She requests a transfer to a less dangerous position, away from the front lines, in an effort to protect her family and regain some semblance of normalcy. But the request is denied, as her department insists that she remain in her current role, where her expertise is needed most. Conway's frustration grows, as she feels the department is not fully understanding the gravity of her situation. Her personal safety should come first, but the system she has always worked for seems unwilling to acknowledge the extreme risks she is facing. Judge Whitman, too, faces a difficult choice. As the threats continue to mount, her colleagues in the judiciary offer to take her off her most high-profile cases, in an attempt to remove the immediate danger. But Whitman refuses to step down. She believes that if she gives in to the pressure now, it will send the message that she can be bullied into submission. She digs in her heels, determined to maintain control over her career and her sense of justice. But deep down, she knows that her fight is becoming increasingly difficult. and the personal cost of continuing this battle is mounting. As both women continue to stand their ground, the situation grows more dangerous with each passing day. What started as a professional conflict has now become a life-and-death struggle, with both Whitman and Conway caught in a web of threats, intimidation, and violence. Each woman is faced with the challenge of navigating her professional responsibilities while safeguarding her family and personal well-being. The stakes are higher than ever before, and neither woman is willing to back down. As the danger and tension continue to escalate, both Judge Whitman and Officer Conway find themselves confronted not only by the external threats, but also by internal resistance and mounting pressure from their respective institutions. The powerful forces arrayed against them, coupled with their unwavering resolve, create an environment where every decision feels like a high-stakes gamble. For each woman, the weight of responsibility becomes heavier with each passing day, and their battle to hold the line against their enemies is met with challenges from within their own ranks. Judge Whitman's decision to remain on the bench, despite the mounting threats against her and her family, is not an easy one. Her refusal to step back from her high-profile cases comes at a cost. Her colleagues in the judiciary, while sympathetic to her plight, begin to express concern about the toll the situation is taking on her personal well-being. They urge her to reconsider her position, suggesting that she take a leave of absence until the situation has cooled down. But Whitman is resolute. To step down now, she believes, would be to give in to the very forces trying to break her, and she refuses to let that happen. Yet, as the pressure mounts, she finds herself facing increasing resistance from the judicial system. Some of her fellow judges, wary of the attention her case is drawing, begin to distance themselves from her. They worry about the public perception of a judge being threatened and harassed by criminals, fearing that it may tarnish the reputation of the entire judiciary. The higher-ups within the judicial system subtly imply that Whitman's refusal to back down is causing unnecessary distractions and endangering the institution's integrity. The pressure to resolve the situation quietly, without causing a media storm, becomes palpable. Whitman feels the isolation growing. Her colleagues, who once had her back, now seem to question her judgment. Some of them express doubts about her ability to continue serving as a judge, given the intense scrutiny she is under. The weight of their doubts, along with the constant threat of violence, begins to take its toll. The once confident judge begins to question whether she can truly continue to fight back against the mounting pressure. Her private life, once separate from her professional world, is now inextricably tied to the danger she faces. Each day, she is reminded that her family's safety is hanging by a thread. Despite the internal resistance, Whitman refuses to be swayed. She knows that if she succumbs to the pressure, it will not only mean a personal defeat, but a public one. She presses on with her cases, relying on her trusted security team and the support of a few loyal colleagues who remain by her side. But even with their support, Whitman's every move is under intense scrutiny, and the strain is becoming unbearable. The weight of maintaining control over her career, her reputation, and her safety is beginning to wear her down. Meanwhile, Officer Conway faces her own brand of resistance within the police force. While the department has provided her with personal protection, the atmosphere within the precinct is increasingly one of resentment. Conway's decision to remain on duty despite the threats against her has caused friction among her fellow officers. Many of them are growing increasingly frustrated with the heavy security measures and the constant vigilance required to ensure her safety. Some officers privately question her ability to handle the situation, accusing her of putting them all in danger by refusing to step down and let others take over. The sense of camaraderie that once defined Conway's relationships with her colleagues begins to fray. The pressure mounts as Conway struggles to balance her responsibilities as a police officer with the demands of personal safety. The constant presence of her security detail serves as a reminder of how far the situation has spiraled, and the officers assigned to protect her often find themselves at odds with Conway's desire to continue working. While they understand the severity of the threats she is facing, they are also growing weary of the constant need for heightened security. Conway's every move is being monitored, and she finds herself under constant surveillance. Even when she is off duty, the once close relationships with her fellow officers begin to shift, and she starts to feel like an outsider within the very institution she has devoted her life to. The department's leadership also becomes increasingly involved in the situation. Conway's superior officers, recognizing the toll the pressure is taking on her, begin to push for her to take a temporary leave of absence. They argue that her personal safety must come first, and they stress that the department cannot afford to have an officer who is constantly under threat. Conway's refusal to take time off only intensifies the pressure she faces, and the tension between her and her superiors grows. Her refusal to step down, to take the easy way out, becomes a point of contention within the police force. As Conway's personal and professional worlds begin to collide, she finds herself questioning her place within the police department. She wonders whether her decision to stay on the front lines, to continue facing the threats head-on, is the right one. Should she continue to fight, or should she take the advice of her colleagues and step back to preserve her safety? Conway's internal conflict becomes just as overwhelming as the external threats. She no longer knows who to trust or where to turn for support. The resistance from her colleagues, coupled with the pressure from her superiors, creates a sense of isolation that is both suffocating and disorienting. Meanwhile, the pressure on both women intensifies as they continue to face resistance from within their own institutions. Both Whitman and Conway are at a crossroads, forced to confront the choices they have made and the cost of their decisions. The weight of their responsibilities and the danger surrounding them are becoming increasingly difficult to bear. Both women know that the only way forward is to press on, but they are beginning to wonder how much longer they can sustain their fight. The resistance they face, both from within and outside their respective institutions, serves as a reminder that no battle is ever easy. For Whitman, it is a fight for her career, her family, and her reputation. For Conway, it is a fight for her safety, her sense of duty, and her place within the police force. The pressure to give in, to retreat, is ever present, but both women are determined to continue their fight, no matter the cost. As the narrative reaches its climax, the story of Judge Whitman and Officer Conway culminates in an open-ended conclusion, leaving readers to ponder the uncertain futures of these two indomitable women who have stood up to immense pressure and threats. While both women remain resilient in their individual battles, the conclusion serves as a moment of pause rather than finality, challenging the audience to reflect on the broader implications of their struggles. The open ending does not provide neat resolutions or definitive answers. Instead, it mirrors the ongoing struggle faced by many who confront systemic power, corruption, and personal danger. Judge Whitman's defiant stand against the criminal forces trying to manipulate the legal system remains unresolved. She continues to hold her ground in her courtroom, but her safety is increasingly compromised, and the internal resistance she faces within the judicial system grows. The tension between her personal integrity and the institutional pressures she encounters is palpable, yet her strength and determination remain her guiding forces. Whitman's future, though uncertain, is characterized by her unwavering resolve to not let the forces of intimidation dictate the course of justice. Officer Conway, too, stands at a crossroads. Her decision to continue working under constant threat of harm, despite the pressure from within her own department and the mounting personal toll it takes, marks her as a woman unwilling to bend under duress. However, Conway is forced to confront the limitations of her own endurance, both mentally and physically. The tension within the police force and her strained relationships with colleagues who question her judgment add to her internal turmoil. Will she remain steadfast in her duty, or will the relentless pressures force her to reconsider her position? The open ending invites speculation about her next steps, leaving her fate in the hands of the reader's imagination. The decision to leave the conclusion unresolved serves as a reflection of the real-world complexity of situations like these, where there are no simple answers or easy resolutions. Just as Whitman and Conway grapple with the consequences of their decisions, readers are left to reflect on their own values and the limits of resilience. What does it mean to stand firm in the face of danger? Is it worth sacrificing personal safety for a greater cause? Or does survival require retreat? These are questions that remain open-ended, with no right or wrong answers. Just as Whitman and Conway's futures hang in the balance, The open ending also reflects the broader societal issues that these characters represent. Whitman, as a female judge, challenges the gender dynamics that exist within the legal profession. Her refusal to conform to expectations and her commitment to justice, even in the face of threats, offer a critique of the systemic gender biases that persist in many fields. Similarly, Conway's struggle within the police department speaks to the challenges faced by women in law enforcement, particularly in environments that are often hostile to female officers. The pressures they face, both external and internal, highlight the difficulties that women in these professions encounter as they attempt to balance their careers with their personal safety and well-being. Both characters are representative of broader societal struggles, and their actions serve as a call to reflection for those who encounter similar challenges in their own lives. Whether in the courtroom or on the streets, the fight for justice, equality, and personal integrity is never straightforward. It is fraught with obstacles, both visible and invisible, and requires constant vigilance and resilience. The story's conclusion, by leaving things unresolved, emphasizes that the fight for change is ongoing, and there is no final victory or closure. It invites the reader to consider their role in the world around them, encouraging them to question the systems they are a part of and to reflect on how they can contribute to the struggle for justice. In the end, the open conclusion serves not just as a narrative device, but as a tool for introspection. The unresolved nature of the story echoes the fact that many of the challenges faced by Whitman and Conway are still present in the real world. Women continue to fight against systemic injustice, violence, and discrimination, often with little recognition or support. The story, by leaving the ending open, reminds us that the battle is not over and that there are still many struggles left to be faced. Whitman and Conway's futures are uncertain, but their stories continue to resonate, urging readers to confront their own assumptions and biases. Their resilience in the face of adversity serves as both a warning and an inspiration. A warning that the systems of power we navigate are fraught with danger, and an inspiration to stand firm, to challenge injustice, and to never back down, even when the outcome is uncertain. The open-ended nature of the story allows the audience to fill in the blanks, to imagine the potential outcomes, and to reflect on what justice truly means in the face of systemic oppression. Is it enough to fight against the system, or must one also fight to change it from within? Can one person's struggle be enough to bring about lasting change, or does it require the collective effort of many? These questions linger long after the story has ended, prompting reflection on the world we live in and the role we each play in shaping it. As Judge Whitman and Officer Conway continue their respective battles, they leave a legacy of courage and defiance in the face of overwhelming odds. Their stories, though unfinished, inspire those who encounter them to continue pushing forward, to question the status quo, and to stand firm in their convictions. No matter the cost, their journeys are far from over, and the challenges they face may never fully disappear. But in their resilience, they remind us that the fight for justice is one that is always worth fighting, even when the ending remains uncertain.